Are you feeling exhausted, weighed down by burdens that seem too heavy to carry? Have you prayed, cried, and waited, yet God still seems silent? You're not alone. Life can be overwhelming, and sometimes the waiting feels unbearable. But I want you to hold on, because this message might be exactly what you need to hear today. It's in our darkest moments that we begin to question everything. Why is God letting this happen to me? Why do I feel so alone? Why does He not answer when I cry out to Him? These questions are not signs of weak faith. They are the cries of a heart desperate for reassurance. And the good news is, God hears every single one of them. Even when it feels like He's far away, He is closer than ever, working behind the scenes in ways you cannot yet see. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "God made us. He invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on gasoline and it won't run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on Himself. He is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn." This means that no matter how much we try to fix our problems on our own, we will never find true peace apart from Him. The world will tell you that success, money, relationships, or even self-improvement will bring you happiness. But real peace, the kind that sustains you through trials, can only come from God. There are moments when the weight of life becomes too much, when your spirit feels drained and the road ahead seems endless. You're tired, you're weary, and you don't know how much longer you can hold on. But Jesus has a message for you today. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. This is not a suggestion, it's a promise. When you surrender your struggles to God, you're not giving up. You're allowing Him to step in and do what only He can do. Yet, surrendering is one of the hardest things to do because we like to be in control. We want answers now. We want solutions immediately. But God operates on a different timeline, one that is always for our good, even when we don't understand it in the moment. Think about a child learning to walk. When they stumble, their parent doesn't rush to pick them up every single time. Instead, they allow the child to find their balance, to build strength, to develop confidence. And when that child finally walks on their own, the joy is immeasurable. This is how God works in our lives. His delays are not punishments, they are preparation. But waiting is hard. It's in the waiting that doubt creeps in. You may wonder, did I do something wrong? Is God punishing me? Has He forgotten about me? These thoughts are the enemy's way of keeping you trapped in fear and discouragement. But let me remind you of a powerful truth. God is never late. He is always on time. Lamentations 3:25-26 says, "The Lord is good to those whose hope is in Him, to the one who seeks Him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." This means that even when you don't see the answer yet, even when everything feels like it's falling apart, God is still in control. He is still moving. He is still working all things together for your good. C.S. Lewis also reminds us, reliance on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. Faith is not a one-time decision, it's a daily commitment. Every day you wake up and choose to trust Him, even when things don't make sense. Every day you remind yourself that He has never failed you before, and He won't start now. If this message speaks to your heart, I want you to type, "God is always with me," in the comments. Because sometimes, just declaring your faith, even when you feel weak, is the first step to breakthrough. Today we're going to dive deep into the truth about waiting on God. Why does He make us wait? What is He doing behind the scenes? And how can we hold on when the waiting feels unbearable? If you're ready to let go of fear and step into faith, stay with me, because what God has in store for you is worth every second of the wait. There are moments in life when the weight of pain and disappointment feels unbearable. You pray, you plead, and yet nothing seems to change. The silence from heaven can be deafening, making you wonder if God is even listening. You see others receiving their breakthroughs, their prayers answered, while you remain stuck in a cycle of waiting and wondering. The more you cry out, the more it seems like your voice is lost in the vastness of the universe. You try to hold on to faith, but deep inside you feel abandoned. You're not alone in this. Every believer has faced a moment where they felt like their prayers were bouncing off the ceiling, going nowhere. Maybe you're facing an illness that won't go away, a financial crisis that keeps getting worse, a broken relationship that refuses to heal, or a deep loneliness that lingers no matter what you do. It's exhausting to keep trusting when every sign around you tells you to give up. You want to believe that God has a plan, that He is working things out, but in the absence of answers, doubt begins to creep in. Does He even see my pain? Does He care? Have you ever found yourself crying out, "God, why aren't you answering me?" Those late-night prayers whispered through tears, those desperate moments when you're on your knees, begging for even a small sign that He is near. Maybe you've been faithful, doing everything right, yet life continues to throw obstacles in your path. It's in those moments of deep despair that the enemy tries to plant lies in your heart, lies that say God has forgotten you, that He doesn't care, that your suffering has no purpose. But let me remind you of something powerful. Just because you don't see Him working doesn't mean He isn't. When we look at the Bible, we see countless stories of people who felt abandoned, but were actually in the middle of God's divine plan. One of the most profound examples is the story of Hannah. In 1 Samuel 1:10-11, we see a woman in deep anguish, crying out to God for a child. Year after year she prayed, and year after year nothing changed. She was ridiculed, shamed, and burdened by disappointment. Yet, despite the silence, she never stopped praying. She never stopped believing. Hannah's story is a powerful reminder that God's delays are not His denials. She continued to pour out her heart, trusting that even in her pain, God was listening. And He was. In His perfect timing, He answered her prayer, and she gave birth to Samuel, one of the greatest prophets in history. But imagine if she had given up. Imagine if she had allowed the pain of waiting to destroy her faith. She would have never seen the miracle God had prepared for her. Your situation may look hopeless now. It may seem like God is silent, but the truth is, He sees every tear, hears every cry, and knows every ache in your heart. Just because you don't see the answer yet doesn't mean He isn't working behind the scenes. God is preparing something far greater than what you're asking for. Hold on, because your breakthrough is coming. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Reliance on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done." This is the essence of faith, not a one-time decision, but a daily surrender. Every morning we wake up with new worries, new struggles, and new fears. And every morning we must choose again to trust God. It's easy to have faith when life is smooth, but real trust is built in the waiting, in the uncertainty, in the moments when God seems silent. Faith is not about seeing the path ahead, it's about knowing that even in the darkness, God is still guiding the way. Lamentations 3:25-26 reminds us, "The Lord is good to those whose hope is in Him, to the one who seeks Him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." These words were written during a time of great suffering, a time when all seemed lost. Yet even in the pain, the writer held on to hope. Waiting on God is not wasted time. It is a sacred period of preparation, a season where He refines your heart, deepens your faith, and aligns your life with His divine purpose. What feels like a delay is often God's way of positioning you for something greater. Before you lose hope, remember this: God is still in control. The situation that seems impossible to you is already solved in His perfect plan. The tears you've cried, the prayers you've whispered, none of them have been ignored. God is moving even when you can't see it. So hold on. Keep believing. Your breakthrough is on its way. Just because God is silent doesn't mean He's absent. His quietness is not neglect, nor is it a sign that He has abandoned you. In fact, some of the greatest works God does in our lives happen in the silence. It's in the waiting that He is shaping us, strengthening our faith and preparing us for what's ahead. But when we're in the middle of a storm, it's hard to see His hand at work. We want immediate answers, quick resolutions, and instant relief. When those don't come, we start to question, "God, do you even care? Have you forgotten me?" But let me assure you, God sees everything you're going through. He hears every cry, every prayer, every unspoken word of desperation. He is working behind the scenes in ways you can't imagine. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean He isn't moving. God's delays are not His denials. Look at the story of Joseph. If anyone understood the pain of waiting, it was him. In Genesis, we see a young man who had dreams of greatness, only to be betrayed by his own brothers and sold into slavery. He went from being his father's favorite son to being a servant in a foreign land. And just when it seemed like his situation was improving, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Can you imagine how hopeless Joseph must have felt? Year after year passed, and despite his faithfulness, nothing changed. He had every reason to believe that God had forgotten him, but God hadn't. What Joseph didn't know was that God was using every painful experience to prepare him for something greater. The betrayal, the slavery, the imprisonment, none of it was wasted. When the right time came, God elevated Joseph to the second highest position in Egypt. The very brothers who sold him into slavery came before him, desperate for help, and in that moment Joseph realized the truth of God's plan. In Genesis 50 verse 20, he said to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph's story teaches us a powerful lesson. Just because we don't understand God's plan in the moment doesn't mean he doesn't have one. Every struggle, every delay, every moment of suffering is shaping us for something greater. What the enemy meant for harm, God is using for your good. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "I am sure that God keeps no one waiting unless he sees that it is good for him to wait." These words remind us that God's timing is never random. It is always intentional. We often think of waiting as wasted time, but in reality it is a time of transformation. God allows waiting because he is preparing us for something we are not yet ready for. Sometimes we are so eager to receive what we've prayed for that we don't realize we lack the maturity, the wisdom, or the spiritual depth to handle it. Imagine a child asking for the keys to a car before they've learned how to drive. A loving parent wouldn't hand them over, not because they want to withhold a gift, but because they know that receiving it too soon would be dangerous. In the same way, God knows the right time for every blessing in our lives. He is not denying you. He is protecting you. He is refining your heart, building your character, and strengthening your faith so that when the time comes, you will be fully prepared to step into what he has planned for you. So if you are in a season of waiting, do not be discouraged. God is not punishing you. He is positioning you. He is working things out in ways you cannot yet see. Keep trusting, keep praying, and hold on to his promises. The delay you are experiencing today is setting you up for the testimony you will share tomorrow. Waiting is never easy. It challenges our patience, tests our faith, and sometimes leaves us questioning whether God truly hears us. But every delay serves a divine purpose. God doesn't withhold blessings to punish us. He uses waiting to shape us, strengthen us, and prepare us for something greater. First, waiting builds character. Romans 5:3-4 says, "We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." Just like gold is refined in fire, our character is refined through seasons of waiting. When we endure struggles with faith, we develop resilience and strength that cannot be gained any other way. Second, waiting tests our faith. Isaiah 46:10 reminds us of God's sovereignty. "My purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." Faith isn't truly tested in moments of abundance, but in moments of uncertainty. Will you trust God when the answer hasn't come yet? Will you continue believing in his goodness when your circumstances suggest otherwise? The waiting season reveals the depth of our trust in him. Lastly, waiting prepares us. Jeremiah 29:11 declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Sometimes we are eager to step into a blessing before we are ready to handle it. God, in his wisdom, withholds certain things until we have the maturity and strength to receive them fully. What feels like a delay is actually a divine setup for something much greater than we imagined. Psychologists call this delayed gratification, and it plays a crucial role in developing patience and resilience. Studies show that people who learn to wait for rewards tend to be more disciplined, emotionally strong, and successful in life. The same principle applies to our spiritual journey. When we wait on God, we cultivate a deeper reliance on him rather than on instant solutions. This strengthens our faith, teaching us to walk by trust rather than by sight. Instead of demanding quick answers, we learn to appreciate God's perfect timing, knowing that what He has in store for us is always worth the wait. So before you grow discouraged, remember this. What God is preparing for you is greater than you can imagine. His delays are not denials. He is aligning things in ways beyond your understanding, opening doors you cannot yet see, and preparing blessings that exceed your expectations. Don't lose faith just because you can't see the outcome. Hold on, because when God moves, it will be far greater than anything you ever prayed for. One of the hardest questions we face in life is, why does God allow suffering? If He is loving and all-powerful, why doesn't He stop our pain? Why does He allow heartache, loss, and disappointment? This question has troubled believers for centuries, and in our darkest moments, it can shake our faith. We want to believe in God's goodness, but when suffering enters our lives, it's easy to wonder if He has abandoned us. But suffering is not proof that God doesn't care. It is often a part of His greater plan. We live in a broken world where pain is inevitable, but God never allows suffering without purpose. Sometimes He uses it to draw us closer to Him, to refine our hearts, and to prepare us for something greater. The pain we experience now is not the end of the story. In the hands of God, suffering is transformed into something redemptive. He never wastes our pain, He redeems it. A powerful example of this is found in the story of Lazarus in John 11:1-44. Lazarus was a dear friend of Jesus, yet when he fell sick, Jesus did something unexpected. He delayed. Instead of rushing to heal him, Jesus waited. During that time, Lazarus died, and his sisters Mary and Martha were devastated. They cried out, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Their words echo what many of us feel when we suffer. God, where were you? Why didn't you stop this? But Jesus had a greater plan. He approached the tomb and did something no one expected. He commanded Lazarus to rise. And in an instant, what seemed like an irreversible tragedy became a testimony of God's power. Had Jesus healed Lazarus while he was sick, it would have been a miracle. But by allowing him to die and then raising him back to life, God's glory was revealed in an even greater way. Lazarus' story teaches us something profound. Sometimes, God delays not to punish us, but to reveal a greater miracle. You may feel like your situation is beyond hope, like God is too late, but He is never late. His timing is perfect, and when He moves, it will be in a way that displays His power beyond what you imagined. C.S. Lewis wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Pain has a way of drawing us closer to God in a way that comfort never could. When everything is going well, we often drift, becoming self-reliant and forgetting our deep need for Him. But in suffering, our hearts cry out, and in that cry we find God's presence like never before. Suffering forces us to rely on Him, to seek Him, and to recognize that He is our only true source of strength. Though we may not understand why we suffer in the moment, we can trust that God is using even the hardest trials for our good. He does not cause our pain, but He will never let it be wasted. What feels like an ending is often the beginning of something greater. Faith is not truly tested in seasons of comfort, but in seasons of trial. When everything is going well, it's easy to trust God. But when life falls apart, when prayers seem unanswered, when suffering feels endless, that is when faith becomes real. The Bible is filled with stories of men and women who endured unimaginable suffering, yet their faith remained unshaken. Look at Job. He was a man of great faith, yet in one moment everything was taken from him. His wealth, his health, even his children. He had every reason to be angry, to curse God, to walk away from his faith. Yet in Job 1:21 he declared, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job's story reminds us that faith is not about trusting God only when life is good. It's about trusting Him even when life makes no sense. Then there's Paul. Few suffered as much as he did. Beaten, imprisoned, shipwrecked, betrayed. He begged God to remove a persistent hardship from his life, but instead of removing it, God gave him a greater revelation. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, God tells Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul realized that suffering wasn't a sign of God's absence. It was an opportunity for God's power to be revealed. Hardship forces us to confront the limits of our own strength and lean entirely on God. In psychology, this is known as post-traumatic growth, the idea that great suffering, when approached with the right mindset, can lead to greater strength, wisdom, and resilience. Trials refine us, stripping away everything that distracts us from God and drawing us closer to Him. It's in the fire that faith is purified. If you're struggling right now, hold on. Your breakthrough is coming. This season of hardship is not your final chapter. God is still writing your story, and He has something greater ahead. He has never failed before, and He won't start now. Keep believing, keep praying, and keep trusting, because the God who was faithful to Job and Paul is the same God who is walking with you today. Patience is one of the hardest virtues to cultivate, yet it is one of the most essential in our walk with God. In a world that thrives on instant gratification, waiting feels like a waste of time. We live in an age where everything is designed to be fast: fast food, fast internet, fast solutions. But God does not operate on human timelines. His ways are higher, and His timing is perfect. James 5 verse 7-8 reminds us, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near." Just like a farmer doesn't rush the process of growth, we cannot rush God's plans. Everything He does is intentional, and every delay serves a purpose. Romans 8 verse 28 assures us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Even when we don't see it, God is working things out behind the scenes. Waiting is not wasted time. It is a season of preparation, refinement, and growth. When we learn to embrace patience, we begin to see how God's delays are actually blessings in disguise. No one understood the test of patience better than Abraham and Sarah. In Genesis 21, we read about their long-awaited promise, the birth of Isaac. But the journey to that moment was anything but easy. God had promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, yet as the years passed, that promise seemed impossible. He and Sarah were growing older, and they still had no child. The waiting was agonizing. There were moments of doubt, moments of frustration, and even moments where they tried to take matters into their own hands. Sarah, believing she was too old, gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, hoping to fulfill God's promise in her own way. But that decision only brought heartache and complications. Yet despite their missteps, God remained faithful. At the appointed time, when Sarah was 90 years old and Abraham was 100, God fulfilled His promise. Isaac was born, and through him, God's covenant with Abraham was established. Their story is a powerful reminder that God's promises never fail, but they are fulfilled in His time, not ours. Imagine if Abraham and Sarah had given up. Imagine if they had walked away from God's plan because it was taking too long. They would have missed out on the miracle God had in store for them. The same is true for us. If we let impatience dictate our actions, we risk stepping outside of God's will. But when we trust Him fully and wait with faith, we open ourselves to His perfect blessings. Waiting is never easy, but it is always worth it. If God has placed a promise in your heart, hold on to it. No matter how long it takes, no matter how impossible it seems, God is faithful, and when the time is right, His promise will come to pass. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "What one calls interruptions are precisely one's real life, the life that God is sending day by day." So often we view delays as obstacles, as disruptions to the life we planned. We see waiting as wasted time, setbacks as failures, and obstacles as things that keep us from moving forward. But what if these interruptions are not distractions, but divine appointments? What if the waiting period is actually the season where God is doing His most important work in us? We tend to measure life by milestones, achievements, promotions, breakthroughs. But God measures life differently. He is more concerned with who we are becoming than how quickly we reach our goals. The very things we see as interruptions, the closed doors, the unanswered prayers, the detours, are often God's way of redirecting us towards something better. Patience isn't just about waiting. It's about trusting that even in the waiting, God is still working. Psychologists call this the growth mindset. The idea that challenges, obstacles, and setbacks are opportunities for development rather than barriers to success. People who embrace patience often experience greater emotional strength, deeper wisdom, and stronger resilience. Patience teaches us self-control, preventing us from making impulsive, regretful decisions. It also teaches trust, forcing us to rely on God rather than our own understanding. Think about a caterpillar in a cocoon. The waiting period feels like confinement, but in reality it's transformation. If a caterpillar were to cut the process short, it would never develop the strength to fly. The same is true for us. When we rush the process, we miss the growth, the refining, and the preparation that God is doing within us. The waiting isn't meant to frustrate you. It's meant to shape you into the person who can handle the blessing when it comes. So before you get discouraged, remember, God's delay is not a denial. He is preparing something greater. He is not making you wait because he has forgotten you. He is making you wait because what he has planned is far bigger than what you could have imagined. What seems like an unanswered prayer is actually a greater blessing in the making. If Joseph had been freed from prison too soon, he would never have become Egypt's ruler. If David had taken the throne before God's appointed time, he would not have been the king Israel needed. If Sarah had given birth earlier, it would not have been the miracle God intended. The same is true for you. What you are waiting for is not delayed. It is being divinely orchestrated for the right moment. So don't let impatience steal your faith. Don't allow doubt to make you settle for less than what God has for you. Hold on. Keep trusting. Your breakthrough is coming, and when it does, it will be greater than anything you ever imagined. God sees your pain. He hears your cries. He knows the silent prayers you've whispered in the darkness, the tears you've wiped away when no one was looking, the weight of the burdens you carry every single day. Even when it feels like he is silent, he is not absent. Even when the waiting seems endless, he is still working. The delays you are facing right now are not a sign that God has forgotten you. They are proof that he is preparing something far greater than you could ever imagine. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." This verse is not just a suggestion, it is a command. Be still, not anxious, not restless, not overwhelmed. Be still and trust that the same God who created the universe, who parted the Red Sea, who raised Lazarus from the dead, is the same God who is holding your life in his hands. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he is doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof. But then he starts knocking the house about in ways that hurt abominably and do not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of, throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself." God is doing the same with you. You may feel like everything is falling apart, but what if everything is actually falling into place? What if the delay, the hardship, the struggle is not a punishment but a preparation? God is not just answering your prayers, he is transforming you. He is not just working in your situation, he is working in you. If you have been feeling weary, if you have been waiting for an answer, if you have been wondering whether God is still with you, this is your confirmation. He has not left you. He is moving even now, even in ways you cannot see. Hold on. Trust him. Your breakthrough is coming. I want you to type in the comments, "God is always with me." Declare it over your life. Speak it over your situation. Because when you declare your faith, you silence the doubts. If this message has touched your heart, I encourage you to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more uplifting content. Keep holding on, because God's timing is never wrong. What he has planned for you is beyond anything you could have hoped for. Your pain will not last forever. Your waiting is not in vain. Your prayers have been heard. God's promises are true. Stay strong. Your miracle is on its way.